everyone, Gregg Braden here, and I want to welcome you to this session of our questions and answers, our weekly Q&A. I'm going to get right to it. I've got a really good question from Elizabeth. Elizabeth asks, Greg, can you please talk about your understanding of reincarnation in light of the discoveries that you share and the research that you've written about? Many thanks. It's a big question. We have done an entire television series through the Gaia organization that based upon this answer. I'm going to do my best to encapsulate that answer here in just a few moments with you. We talk about reincarnation, lifetime after lifetime after lifetime, the ability to return to this world after we have ended one life and when we begin a new life. It means different things to different people. We often refer to our most ancient and cherished spiritual traditions to help us to understand what this means. And we all have done this. In my upbringing, this is the way I was taught to understand reincarnation. And interestingly, almost every indigenous and ancient tradition allows for reincarnation. Many people will say that Christianity does not. The current version of Christianity doesn't acknowledge it clearly, although I don't see where it discounts it. But when we go back into the earlier texts, the canon of the modern Bible before it was edited, we see references to lifetimes before and the same person experiencing different lifetimes. I think most of us know that, most of you know that the biblical canon was edited in the 4th century during the time of the Emperor Constantine, during what was called the Council of Nicaea. And in that editing, 43 books were removed. We know that because they were discovered in the mid-20th century in the Nag Hammadi Library, the oldest records of the New Testament, and also through the Dead Sea Scrolls, which were the oldest records of the Old Testament. So all this to say that even Christianity appears to have acknowledged reincarnation in the original writings before they were modified. But I'm looking at this from the perspective of science. I'm a scientist. I'm a systems scientist. My degree is primarily in the earth sciences. I'm a geologist by degree with a strong background in life sciences, math, physics, computer science, cosmology, and archaeology. And all this works together. Those are the little boxes that we have created to study our relationship to the world, but the world doesn't know about those boxes. So, how do you know where math ends and chemistry begins, or where physics ends and biology begins? It's all life. It's all nature. So with that in mind, what I want to say is the best science of the modern world is now giving us a new way to think about existence, to think about our lives, to think about the world. And it stems from the technology that is helping us to understand simulations and virtual realities. The question has now become, in the world of science and physics, sometimes it's called the forbidden question, are we in fact living in a simulated reality? Are we living in a virtual reality? And if we are, why? What does that mean? Who created the virtual reality? And if we are not here because we're a simulation, then where are we? And all of these scientific endeavors, or the endeavors to answer scientifically these questions, are now shedding new light on the ideas of what is death, what is life, what is reincarnation, what is God. So I'm going to talk to you about that just a little bit. What the science is showing us right now, algorithms have been developed and run on very sophisticated computers, plugging in many levels of variables to determine whether or not this is what is called a base reality, or the real world. And the algorithms have come back and now are telling us that the odds are tremendously in favor of us living in a simulation. The odds are greater that this is a virtual reality than that this is what's called a base reality. Experiments have been done recently to, and this is fascinating to me, to validate this principle. Now, I'm just going to give you one example. On your computer, when you're running a game, for example, a virtual reality, a simulated reality, it's very difficult for your computer to hold all of the data in place necessary for everything that happens in that game all at the same time if you're not using those parts of the game. So what the computer does is it will bring up only the elements that are necessary, only the rooms you need to see, only the trees, only the people. If it's a battle scene, only the swords or the shields or the weapons or whatever they are. For that particular scene, even though that scene is happening within a greater reality, and there are other rooms in the building and there are other parts of the desert, you won't see those on your computer screen because the computer only brings up what it needs in the moment that it needs it. Well, this is interesting because the physics experiments that were conducted early in the 20th century showed us that our reality, it changes and becomes a physical reality when it's observed. But when it's not observed, it is a wave. When it is observed, that wave collapses into a particle. So this is called the observer effect. So what the experiments are showing is that our world behaves very much like the information would behave on the computer during a simulation. So the studies are going on. It's very controversial, and it means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. For me as a scientist, it helps me to understand through modern language and modern understandings what our ancestors were trying to tell us. And the bottom line is our ancestors told us in every way that they knew how that we are, number one, we're living in a dream, that this world is temporary, that we're not from here, that we are here briefly, we're learning something here that we're going to need when we go somewhere else, and that we last only a short time in this world. It's called the Maya in the Hindu traditions. This is called the Maya, or the illusion, or the dream. So in non-scientific words, our most ancient and cherished traditions told us something very similar to what science is now suggesting today. So what does that mean for reincarnation? Well, when you look at the average human body, whatever average is, we're made of about 50 trillion or so cells. Each of those cells is made of about 100 or trillion or so atoms. And here's the thing about the atoms. The atoms are 99.99999999999% empty space. We are mostly empty space. It doesn't seem that way because of the way we perceive the energy created through the atomic body. But we are essentially empty space. Very much like you would consider an avatar in a simulation to be. So from the perspective of a scientist, if we're not the base reality, where is the base reality? Well, when you close your eyes and you communicate with your higher self, when you're communicating with the angels, when you're communicating with your ancestors who have left this reality, when you communicate with God, when you communicate with all of the consciousness, the elements of consciousness that we communicate with, where are they? What the scientific theory is saying is they are outside of the reality, that we exist beyond this veil in what's called a base reality, and that we are projecting ourselves into this world to have an experience in what seems to us like a 100-year lifetime can be 20 minutes. It could be 20 minutes outside of that reality because the time is relative. So this perspective suggests that when we move through this reality and something ends our experience, if we're killed in a car accident or we're killed in a battle or we die from whatever we die from, that death is the end of our projection into this reality. But our base reality, my real Gregg, is on the other side of that veil. And if I need to learn something more, or I need to continue a learning process, that I may come back into this reality in another body to pick this up where I left off. And that is reincarnation. This is the way that science now is beginning to consider it. I'm not saying all scientists are on board with this because they're not. It's so new. You now can get an advanced degree, by the way. You can get a PhD in exploring whether or not we're living in a simulation, how real this reality is. And I think University of Washington was the first to offer that, and I think I believe other places do now. I know University of Washington was the first. Back in 2001 is when that began. So we've been considering this for a while. So the whole idea of us living in a virtual reality, it gives us a new way to think about our origin, our history, our past, about the nature of reality, about answering the questions, why are we here? When you look into a simulation, any kind of a simulation, the purpose of a simulation is for the individual in the simulation to learn something in a relatively safe way they're going to need when they go somewhere else. Cockpit simulators for airline pilots, lunar simulations for people that are walking on the moon, Mars simulations for people that are going to be going in families that are going to be going to Mars. We are learning in these simulations a way of being that we need when we actually have the experiences. There are properties of a simulation that are interesting. Every simulation has a beginning, a place where it starts. It has an end. Sometimes it just times out. Every simulation has rules that, if those rules are discovered and learned and followed, that make life easier in the simulation, every simulation has the ability to communicate outside of the simulation for help. So if you're in a cockpit simulator and you're running into something you've never seen, you're steering the plane and here's a big wind shear coming across the front of the plane, they can communicate with their earpiece, their mouthpiece. They can say, hey, there's a wind shear coming, what do I do? Well, if our experience is following those principles, we have the same thing. We communicate outside the simulation when we talk to our higher selves, through prayer, through meditation, through the angels that guide us, if that's the way you're conditioned to think, or the love of our ancestors that have passed, ultimately through God. So then you ask, why build a simulation? What would be the point? Who benefits? Well, if a traditional simulation is any clue to the answer, that's the answer. Those that benefit are those in the simulation. I think it's very possible. Now, I'm going to deviate from science and share my personal opinion. I personally believe that the evidence supports a possibility that we create the simulation. You and I have created the simulation because there's something available to us in this world that we desperately need to know and to learn before we go to another world, whatever that world is that you want to call it. And when you look at the themes that are playing out, the theme of good and evil is almost universal. The theme of love is almost universal. The theme of us mastering our ability to self-regulate our biology and our emotions. These are almost universal. Interestingly, these are the themes of some of the most popular movies in Hollywood right now, whether you're talking about Wonder Woman, or you're talking about the Avengers, or you're talking about The Matrix. The Matrix was a beautiful example of awakening in one world, recognizing that we live in another world that we can't see, that influences the world we can see, and that we are learning to master that world. Avatar, beautiful film, reminding us of the power of our relationship to our world and our relationship to nature. So this is a long answer to a short question, but I wanted to do this from a non-traditional perspective. Science. We ask science to tell us who we are. We ask science to tell us about our reality. Science is doing a really good job. Some people don't like the answers that are coming back. The answers are giving us a new and empowering way to think about ourselves and our relationship to this world and beyond. And they are giving us a language that helps us to recognize the continuity of the wisdom of our ancestors. Our ancestors tried to tell us something. They tried desperately to tell us what they understood about our relationship to this world and beyond through the words available to them in their time. Now we have new words because we have a new consciousness and we have new technology. But I think we're telling the same story. So reincarnation may be us teaching ourselves and allowing ourselves to come back into this simulation until we have mastered what it is that we're learning to master in this world. So I hope that helps to give some insight. It was a really good question. Elizabeth, thank you for answering or asking that question, and thank you for giving me the opportunity to answer it in this brief venue here.